the stories, the journey, the wild behind the scenes, and much more. I'm Dave Anthony, and I'm the host of From Garage to Stadiums. And of course, in Britain, they become the thing, touring around Britain and working hard, like you said, playing tons of venues.
Oh, yeah.
And something happens which is very interesting. In October 63, Ed Sullivan happens to be in London, and he catches wind of this band, or at least sees them returning from a gig in Sweden, and says, my goodness, what's this all about? And through connections back through to Brian Epstein, he says, I'm going to offer these guys 3 appearances on my Ed Sullivan show, which, for the audience who's a little bit younger, this show ran from 1948 to 1971 every Sunday night in America, and basically had magicians, musicians, comedians. And tell us a little bit about the tectonic shift that occurred on February 9th, 1964, when the Beatles appeared on that show.
Well, it completely changed culture in the United States. I mean, it was an overnight thing, and I can give you a personal story about it. I watched that show as a 13-year-old boy. The next day, I went out to my school bus stop, and all the kids that were standing there, all the boys, suddenly had Beatle haircuts, except one. There was one nasty little boy who said, the Beatles will be gone they're nothing. The Beatles couldn't compare to Bob Dylan and Joan Baez. They're imposters. They'll be finished. And that little boy was me. uh, I saw that show. I couldn't figure out what I was watching. I thought they were complete trash. Yeah. So, because I was a folk singer, I played the real music, the important music. But anyway, that night in February '63 changed everything that we know about America since. It gave all of us a sense of being teenagers. Suddenly felt like they were invested in something more than just being their parents' little kids.
Right.
We had this music. We had a way to look with the long hair. We had a way of dressing, and we had the language that the Beatles were giving us through their music. It was a phenomenal change of culture, and it happened right then.
And it just so happened, I mean, they land, of course, and they do a reporters meeting, the press conferences, and they're funny. They've got personalities. And while people probably went there ambivalent towards them, came away kind of charmed by them, did they not?
Well, the press couldn't believe what they were saying. I mean, the Beatles were so smooth. Their comebacks were so witty. They had amazing stage presence. They handled the New York press. And handling the New York press, let me assure you, is no easy thing. Me being one of them at one time. They were they were sharp, and they knew how to play to the audience. And they immediately won over all the New York media. Everybody wanted a piece of them. They were on the radio, they were on TV, they made themselves accessible. They leaned out of their hotel windows and waved to the crowds. I mean, they really played the whole part. They were media stars as well as musical stars. And there was just something inside of them that knew how to do this. Nobody knows where that comes from. It was an innate thing, and they all had it.
The next album comes out in April 64, called the Beatles' second album, and it contains She Loves You, Roll Over Beethoven, and Money. Then in 64, June, Hard Day's Night comes out, and has obviously Hard Day's Night, Can't Buy Me Love, but it also is followed, Bob, by a pretty seminal movie, Hard Day's Night. That must have solidified the sort of image and the cultural shift.
It did. It kind of showed the rest of the world who these Beatles were. It gave them a very good sense of their attitudes and the way their wit and their charm, their immense charm. everybody wanted to be the Beatles at that point. Everybody wanted to be a part of these young guys.
Mhm.
Um, they were tough, but they weren't too tough. They were witty, but they weren't too witty. They had it all.
Talk about, because you were a part of that era. Talk about what how insular American music was. Like I don't think people realize what change the Beatles brought. We've all heard about the British invasion and Beatlemania, but you have to understand how insular American music was.
Well, there was no British acts, but also don't forget, nobody was writing their own songs. I mean, Elvis never wrote his own songs.
Yeah, good
Uh,
point. Great point.
no band did. And so, here all of a sudden, this band not just writes their own songs, but they're not simpering little pop songs. They have some tooth to them. And you could really get into it. The one thing the Beatles didn't have, and this is really important, and you can't dance to the Beatles songs. So when all of us went to our friend's house or to sock hops or anything, nobody took Beatles records with them because you couldn't dance to them. Uh,
Ah.
and if you think about it, you can't. But
Hmm.
anyway, uh, their music was different. Their music was personal, and it really spoke to the kids. It wasn't written by 50-year-old guys in the Brill Building in New York. It was written by kids their own age for kids their own age, um, and it was impossible. It was impossible to ignore it. It really was.
While they wrote their own songs, there's a meeting with a pretty seminal figure, someone of you written about, Bob Dylan, and that even changes the songwriting once they've met him. Is that fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. They were huge Dylan fans. They got Highway 61 and they played it over and over and over. I mean, they studied it. Look, Paul and John especially, more than the others, they really loved music and they loved the mechanics of music. Um, and they studied everything. I mean, they cribbed from everybody. They cribbed from Buddy Holly, from Eddie Cochran, from Jerry Lee Lewis, and from Bob Dylan, and they homogenized it, and then they made it their own, and they gave us something entirely new from it. And so, yeah, Dylan was a huge influence on them completely, and I might say vice versa.
Hmm, interesting. In what way did this affect Dylan?
He grabbed an electric guitar, my friend. I mean, he realized that rock and roll was where everything was at,
Right.
and
Yeah,
and
Dylan goes electric, huge movement itself.
absolutely, and so one hand watched the other, and all these guys. I mean, now I've been writing about the Rolling Stones for the last 5 years. They were all interconnected.
Yeah.
They all studied each other. They were friends with each other, and they respected each other.
Yeah. Yeah, Mick has talked at length about if there was no Beatles, there might not be the Stones at such a level because the level of competition, friendly competition to up the ante, kept the Stones pretty on the edge.
Absolutely, and like the Beatles, the Stones also listened to Dylan, and really, admired everything he did. So everybody was taking from each other, uh, and molding it into something entirely new.
The other thing that Bob does, Dylan, for the Beatles is introduce them to marijuana, and that listening to Dylan's tunes, being introduced to pot, kind of leads to what a more introspective with Rubber Soul and Revolver, the next albums that come. Is it fair to say?
Well, you said it completely. I mean, pot took them somewhere else. It wasn't just the fact that they were evolving as young men, but they were opening their minds in many different ways.
Rubber Soul, released in December 1965, contains Norwegian Wood, Michelle, and In My Life. And Revolver, an album released in August 1966, contains Got to Get You Into My Life, Eleanor Rigby, and Tomorrow Never Knows.
I don't think we would have gotten Rubber Soul or even, something as simple as Norwegian wood,
Mhm.
without without Dylan's influence and the influence of cultural drugs.